Welcome to the Golden Pathway, the path that leads to personal and planetary transformation. It's also a path that provides a bridge from the seven major world religions to what's going to become the eighth major world religion, the teachings of the Ascended Masters. And we have covered topics as diverse as healing your physical body, healing your psychology, how to excel in relationships, abundance and increasing your supply, strategies for victory, increasing your light in the world, practicing spirituality, and climbing the mystical path. This year, our theme is Pathways to Inner Peace. And we're very happy to have today a topic called Initiations or Tests. How to Pass Either or Both with Flying Colors with Reverend Patrick Danahy. So, as chelas on the path to the ascension, we encounter various tests and initiations every day. And Saint Germain has told us that he won his victory and freedom because he made over 1 million right decisions. I think that means we have to do the same. So, in order to pass our tests and initiations, we need to make right choices, the best right choice. And knowing the difference between a test and an initiation might help us discover better ways to pass each one. So we're going to distinguish between the two today and discover how our returning karma fits into those two categories and different strategies for passing our tests and initiations. You also learn how to make the best decision on the path, not just a right decision. We are happy to welcome Reverend Patrick Danahy. He found the teachings of the Ascended Masters in 1971 and joined the Summit Lighthouse in 1972. He was commissioned as a lay minister in 1973 and has opened and served on several teaching centers for the organization. In 1994, Patrick was ordained and later helped develop curriculum and instructed aspirants in the ministerial training program. He has a bachelor's in psychology. He's an astrology, a licensed hearing specialist, and a ministerial counselor. Patrick lives in Bozeman, Montana with his wife, Ann. And Patrick, we are so excited to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you, Patricia. I'm happy to be here. And I guess my first concept of a test was I think it was my older brother who used to say life is a test, and so so it was a and you know when you think of it, we're so privileged to be working with the teachings brought to us by our messengers and the path of initiation. Because everybody in the whole world receives tests and initiations, but many people are initiated by the world itself. So when we have an opportunity, by the grace of the masters and the messengers in the path, and we'll take a look at a couple of those dispensations here, it means that we enter into a relationship, a figure eight flow with an ascended master. And prior to that, we enter into the beginning paths of chelasship, where we apply the teachings the best we can. And eventually we get to a place where the master looks at someone who's following the path, and it looks promising enough, he has enough trust that he's willing to place a portion of himself into the heart and the soul of the aspirant. And that means there's a whole new level of a relationship between heaven and earth, of a relationship between the higher presence and the soul, becoming one with Christ and one with God.
Patrick, can you move to the middle of the screen, please?
Yeah, sure. I'm not actually looking at the screen right now, so I'm glad you mentioned it. But so are we okay now, Linda?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So I think it's important to remember, because there's an element of compassion there, that everyone on earth is receiving their tests. In psychology, it's well noted that no matter what the socioeconomic circumstances of a person might be, the world is clever enough that they can always find a way to test them to the max. And it's not always by the outer conditions that we can identify either the character of the heart or the path of initiation. As a matter of fact, in the old theosophical activity, there was a rather constant effort on behalf of some of the leaders there, not Blavatsky, but some of the other fellows. And they wanted to have a special training program, which was kind of like, how to do, you might say, magic, how to show people a few things about how the spiritual world works. And in the Mahatma letters, it's recorded with a few responses by Kuthumi and also by Moria, that they weren't particularly interested in teaching Englishmen how to do magic if they couldn't determine the difference between an adept Sherpa and just a rich monarch. So the Brotherhood is not quite so interested in the external details that are so much markers of attainment and success in the earth. The real question is, how's the heart? How's the threefold flame? How much energy and light can a soul handle while maintaining harmony and protecting that light, guarding it? So the path of initiation, and we'll get into a few formal definitions of this a little bit later from the teachings, but the path of initiation is a path of many different tests that lead to the refinement of the soul and the strength of the character that can make them you might say fair co-workers with the masters. So initiation, it can be described as just a series of tests, but they're designed very specifically to bring the soul into a spiritual maturity. And then in the meanwhile, there were individual tests along the line. And for the chela, they often look as though these tests just came out of the woodwork or out of the lawn or out of the fabric or the mise en scene or the circumstances of life. But in
Patrick,
truth,
we
all
need
of
you
these
to
things,
move over again.
thank you. But in truth, all of these things are very carefully measured by the Brotherhood to guide the chelas and the aspirants forward on the path. So I'm going to take a look here at some of the concepts of tests. Now, I suppose from the standpoint of a mega test, of a supergiant test, there's an old phrase that when the plague appears, the wise man is not in the bazaar. And so we learn to be a separate and chosen people, elect and to show ourselves under God, to study the word, to show ourselves approved, and to move forward then wisely on the path. But sometimes the tests are really big. So in the same way that a plague can come in and affect an entire neighborhood, where both good people and bad people can become equally affected by the dangers, there are also cosmic periods. So we have, for instance, the 25,800-year period and the precession of the equinox, in which we have the appearance then of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. And the four horsemen of the apocalypse are cosmic initiators that come in this 25,800 year cycle. So the four horsemen and their riders, they're simply showing us karma that has to be balanced. Now it affects us individually, but it's also affecting us interpersonally, and you might say almost impersonally, because there are requirements for the overall fabric of life, or there are requirements for the overall increase of light for individuals, for families, for karmic units, for planets. So these impressive cosmic beings, the four horsemen of the apocalypse, are sent by God through the four beasts. Now, the four beasts are the lion, the calf, the image of the man, and the flying eagle. And these are the instruments of initiation and of testing, described with great detail in the opening of the seventh seal, which, by the way, we're taking a look at on Thursday evenings in the book study group. And anyone who would like to do that, you're welcome to join. But these emissaries then, cosmic beings working through the energies and the force fields of the planet, working with the personal and impersonal aspects of the work of the brotherhood. They come from the sacred fire, they bring the sacred fire, and the sacred fire can scorch and burn, but it can also elevate and free. And so people can be scared of the idea of the coming of the four horsemen of the apocalypse. They can be scared of having to confront the light. And yet, in our return to God and our becoming increasingly aware of the presence of God with us, entering more and more, not so much entering more and more into a refined love and capacity to enjoy and keep the attention on the presence. We get closer and closer to meeting our God. And so if the light of the four horsemen or the light of the four beasts or the light of the sponsoring master is bringing us into the circumstances that will allow us to be challenged and to then sacrifice some aspects of the lower self that we were tied up in and be freed into receiving those aspects of the higher self, the very living presence and grace of God in us. You know, how beautiful is that? And yet the idea of the four horsemen is fear and trembling, but not necessarily. It can simply be the evolution into a next phase of thy kingdom come. So the four horsemen then come and are an embodiment, form and formless as they are, an embodiment of the karma and of the energy and the energy of God that is behind the karma that needs to be balanced. So in the course of dealing with personal and planetary psychology and the karma of cycles and so forth, we will encounter various initiators at different times. And so we have our cycles, our 12-year cycles, our gigantic 25,800 year cycles. We have the cycle of our birthday, and all of these bring with them the flow of the energy that can be for the deliverance of our own I am presence in Christ's self and a greater expression of grace and sainthood. And it can also be bringing the confrontation with energies not yet transmuted. Now, we've also talked, Mother has also talked about tests in connection with the parable of the pearl of great price. And so this is from the Gnostic text for the Acts of Thomas. And it's the story about a prince that was sent forth by his parents to Egypt to capture the pearl that lies in the sea. So this obviously is another version of the image and the symbol of the pearl of great price. So it's the story of a soul descends from the etheric octave like all of us did, we lose our memory of our origins, and have maybe we have little images, little concepts, but we enter into a realm of relative sleepfulness down here and lose our wakefulness in the etheric or the heavenly planes. So his call from his parents, then his divine parents, he begins to wake up a little bit, and then he goes through various tests, redeems his soul, and becomes a savior of his brothers and sisters who met the similar fates in Egypt, which simply represents the way of the world, the sensual and material, the planes of delusion and death. But then at the end, he returns home, goes through the ritual of the ascension, and is able to stay in the divine realm, having balanced the karma and found the pearl of great price, the mighty I Am Presence. And when we begin to awaken, we recognize then that our soul is naked, that we're not clothed with the light and the grace of our finest times and our origins. And then we enter into the path of redemption, and we begin to take the energies of life that are around us and not simply be consumed by them, but rather to take the energy of life and begin weaving our deathless solar body. And our vision and our light and our energy doesn't just go out into the world around us, but rather we begin to separate ourselves out a little bit from that world. We begin to learn how to see on the inner, to focus on the inner, to feel on the inner, and inside of ourselves, we are then developing the pathway of the alchemical marriage, where the soul is no longer horizontal with the world and the circumstances around, but begins to stand up and to rise up from the plane of the soul, of the seat of the soul chakra into the heart, and eventually from there, and becoming and expressing the Christ, receiving more of the I Am Presence and expressing more of that, enters into the ritual of the ascension. So he sold all that he had, he balanced his karma, increased the light of his soul and his causal body, and then he was brought up into that beautiful pearl and was at home in the kingdom of that holiness and beauty and wholeness. We know that, for instance, we have tests which are also geared on the path of initiation at the summer and the winter solstice. And that's why we write the letters to the Great Karmic Board and take a stock of how we're doing in the cycle of a year. Maury has told us time and again, we have a right to be tested. We have a right to prove the mettle, the strength and the vitality of life. You have a right to pass your tests. And we have a right, Moria says, to expect our chelas to come up higher. So every light bearer, every year, every keeper of the flame, everyone on the planet has a final exam at the summer solstice, and this can take place in the month or the 6 weeks prior to, and even up to the very day of the solstice. The way the cycles work sometimes are kind of interesting. I always slightly distrusted the idea of astrologically of the of the solar return, and but I had made a call one year, but I mean I followed it and all that, but I just thought, oh, it can't really work that way exactly, and but I asked to be shown clearly how that works, and I don't remember the exact details right now, but it was about five minutes before my solar return moved into the new year, so which was a day or two before my birthday, and sure enough, with less than 5 minutes to go, I ran into Mother, and she asked me a question that was directly relevant to the major focus of the solar return chart for that year. And so it was just it was an answer to the call, but it showed me that the cycles can indeed be very exact, can be very precise. Now, we're always taught to conquer our astrology, not to be conquered by it. And so I used to say that the only reason to study astrology was to challenge it. We can take a look at it for its different promises for ease or confrontation. But in reality, it's all to be put beneath our feet, because all it is returning karma. And returning karma is just whatever energy we somehow managed to get engaged with in the past that's coming around for us to decide if we're going to be done in by it or do it in. And so we're going to be learn to be walking on the water of the returning energies of our karma. And Moria says we expect the chelas to come up higher, and that's because we're not interested in having it get on a plateau or a treadmill, but to accelerate and come up with us. Now, in the point of acceleration is woven into this concept of progressive tests. When I remember when we first came into the teachings, Mother used to say the reward of a test is 3 more tests. Well, of course, if you think about it, then each of those 3 tests will give 3 more, and each of those 9 will give 3 more, and each of the 27, and so on. So it very shortly it becomes like the multiplying pennies turning into millions of dollars. But what happens in the course of all of that is that we learn to handle the increasing, accelerating energy of the tests that are passed and the new tests that are given. And we don't find so much only that it can be stressful, but rather we find that it can be the process by which we achieve a greater dominion. And so the little individual energies that used to trip us up are now simply part of a fabric of energy that we're learning to handle with increasing mastery, increasing God control, God mastery. And so the acceleration of the path based on the passing of tests, the receiving of more tests, all of these geared by the Brotherhood into the path of initiation. And these little tests that we get then are eventually for the purpose of the master to determine, well, this woman has been passing a number of tests as a right heart. And I guess I'm willing to invest some of my energy into the heart or the soul of that person. And we'll work together then to see if we can accelerate on the path. And what that means, of course, is that when we seek chelaship, and when a master agrees to take on a chela, the master is giving a portion of himself unto that chela. And so in a certain sense, you could say that the chela holds the master hostage. Now, obviously, the master can withdraw, but it's not without loss. And the master doesn't quit easily. And it is hoped that the chela will not be deflected from the path too easily either. But trusting in the master will continue to move forward, accept the tests that are given, and in the process, achieve accelerated mastery. And thus it's often said that Moria said that change is the order of the day. Change means acceleration. Change means alchemy. The violet flame has been given to us by dear Saint Germain to assist us to do this gracefully. And so even as we keep our expectations high, we also expect the unexpected. It's a byword. They said that that's a byword of those who love El Moria and Lunello, to expect the unexpected. Well, at one level, that's kind of exciting, because to expect the unexpected doesn't mean watch out for a falling safe from the 3rd floor, although I suppose we should be alert to such things. And it doesn't mean just watching out for a 2x4 that's being carelessly carried by someone, although we would want to be alert to such things should they occur. But to expect the unexpected also means that there can be marvelous opportunities just in the course of day-to-day life, and that it really does add a certain degree of magic to slugging through day by day. the possibility of not just another test, but the possibility of a joyful passing of a test. Sometimes they're very simple, and the very simple parts can be very joyful. You know, I mean, it's an extremely mundane example, but I remember one day I was one day I was walking down a hall, and I turned a corner, went into this little room, and there was just a small little pile of dust over in the corner. Well, it wasn't my room, it wasn't on my back, but I just looked at it and I thought, well, what the heck, it's all part of the force field. So I went and cleaned it up and put it in the wastebasket, and then I walked out the door and there was Mother. So I don't know that she knew that I was cleaning things up or anything like that, but I do know that my vibration was right and was generous at that moment of encounter. So it's I mean, that's how mundane and simple things can be, though. And it's also interesting to think in whom or in what circumstances we might run into the master. Which is just another way of thinking about how they said, if the messenger be an ant, heed him. Now, in initiation, we have the good old Oxford English Dictionary that one I prefer to use in most cases, especially if because when the words go back, you can see how they've been used through the course of the last several hundred years, and words can mean different things. Like a knight errant, for instance, is a word that meant different things at different times. But in this case, we got initiation as a formal introduction by preliminary instruction or an initiatory ceremony into some position, office, or society. When we're thinking in terms of information, you might say that that if you read the first chapter of the book, that you got the first initiation of the book, but that you wouldn't have the information that would be granted in the 7th or 8th or 9th chapter. And so there are some things that we learn as we go along on the path of our testing and initiation. And then we grow in wisdom and understanding. And we find that after having failed a few tests, that we don't need to fail at the next time or the time after. So we get smarter as we go. We get more sensitive as we go, more loving. So in a spiritual sense, then, it can be said that initiation is each step or stage or advancement or growth in grace that corresponds to an initiation, which is a spiritual leading forth to a fuller life. So lessons the soul must learn to evolve to the next stage of development. And you can see how that can be both an initiation and a test. Usually in the way I considered tests to be just the components that led to an initiation. So if you passed enough tests, then the master could look at that and say, well, maybe you can take a little more light. And then the master can decide to give a little more light or not. And then the soul gets infused with more light, and you might say that the circumference or the horizon of awareness increases because the light pushes out against the darkness, and you have a larger area of awareness to deal with. And so there are the areas that we couldn't even see before. We're now learning how to navigate. We're learning how to, it's like going into a room that's partially lit and then walking carefully because you're not sure where there's little bits of furniture or something like that. And then after a while, you get used to it. Your own light increases. You can see very clearly where you are, and you get used to the placement of things. So that's a new area, a new force field, a new awareness that then it is an initiation, and by its very nature, it brings more tests because there's a greater force field of responsibility, a greater force field of influence, and so the tests are oftentimes more subtle. It's interesting, you know. There's been a few of the old timers who, in a dictation or otherwise, were told very clearly that they would make their ascension in this life. I think of Sigrid Carlson over at the Rakazi Mansion in Washington, D.C. So in a dictation, the statement was given that she was going to receive her ascension. So when I saw her a few months later in Washington, I went over and I said, you know, Sigrid, I bear witness. And I said, well, how has life changed for you since you got the announcement in the dictation that you're going to ascend? And she said, the tests come far more rapidly and are far more subtle. And I would say that that I can think of 3 people right now who were told that they would ascend, or in one case they weren't told they would ascend, but they were told that they would be personally protected by the master through the end of this man and his wife, through the end of their life. And whenever that happens, whenever there's some kind of a statement like that that's made, there's always energy that comes in to try and mess it up. It's one of the reasons that we have to dare to know, to do, and to be silent, is because discussing degrees of awareness or good fortune oftentimes invites envy and jealousy, or you know, various electronic belt responses from the people around us. And so we're sometimes better off just to enter more and more into the I am presence, more and more into the Christ self, and let everybody receive their own understanding as they each individually are being cared for by the master. And that would be true even for people who are not necessarily accepted in a Guru-Chela relationship yet by a specific master, but who are nonetheless, say, in a community, and the community is being watched carefully by the angels and the masters, so that people will be able to be initiated and accelerated when the time comes, that they're ready for it, and also that they can be protected oftentimes by the people who are governed a little bit more by their electronic belt than by their aspirations to Christhood. So step by step, the disciple is prepared for his soul's teachings on the path. There are some times given to him when it's least expected, and it can happen through family and friends. I remember my mother said once that when she had that when she conquered a certain aspect of her, in this case, it was her karma or her astrology she was referring to. She said she found out that there are other people with their own astrology who would come up and give her plenty to work on. So it's good for us to keep our eye on the goal, and to oftentimes, you know, it's a matter of trusting the master, whether we think we're getting things that we're not getting things that we would like to have, or whether we're things or circumstances, or whether we're getting circumstances or things that might be just fine, but look like they're a little dangerous or testy. Ultimately, the testing is to see whether or not the chela is willing to make the required sacrifices concerning the lesser self that are necessary in order for him or her to receive the mantle of the greater self, the I am presence, as well as the master. Everything the masters do is to gear us to the freedom of working with our own I am presence and our own Christ self, and that clearly and cleanly and solely. So the love of the master is simply the love of God. In God, we are one, and the master will test us and work with us, but it's always to the freedom of our individual God mastery, our individual God control, and you can go around all 12 lines of the clock to God victory and God power. All of that's available. It's the Father's good pleasure to give us every good and perfect gift. And this is done on the path of the testing and initiation. Are you strong enough to handle this bit of energy here? Are you loving enough to be able to help someone here? And so forth and so on. So all of the fabric and interactions with life are, you might say, dynamically or magically charged with this overriding consciousness, which is geared to help us come up higher and be more useful in this world, to be more of our own Christ self and I am presence instead of just more people on the planet, you might say. So the initiations given to disciples and the trials endured by the saints as they move among the unawakened masses are all part of a foolproof system evolved by hierarchy, whereby the real intentions and the actual attainment, not just the wishful thinking, the real intentions and the actual attainment of seekers may be determined each step along the way. And then when all of the tests have been passed and the requirements of the Lords of Karma have been met, then the inheritance, the divine sonship, the freedom and expression of the causal body can be reestablished. And then they are bidden through the ritual of the ascension to eat of the tree of life and to live forever, to pass the tests of the Lamb, to be the Lamb. But here we can be the wife of the Lamb. Here we can be the chela of the Master. But if we balance 100% of our karma, then we can take the test of becoming the Lamb, which was sacrificed in the beginning of the world. And in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and the same was in the beginning with God. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. And this was the Word. And so we enter into the Word. And our path is a path of mantra yoga, includes the work of the Word. And the work of the Word is the presence of God in us, speaking through us unto the God that we worship and adore. And so this circle, this cycle, this revolving, this figure eight flow of as above, so below, of the Master and the chela. And yet what is the Master but a persona of the mighty I am presence? And there's only one presence. What is the Christ? In Jesus? Yes, of course, and all of the ascended masters. And yet they are personifications of the one Christ, of which we are a little tiny part, becoming a bigger and bigger spark, and then a flame, and then a fire, and watching it move through the world we live in, and then in the worlds that we learn to live in. Chananda told us that there are different methods of initiations used by the Brotherhood. He said initiation into the Brotherhood today is somewhat different than it was long ages past. Long ago, the would-be chela would be taken to Luxor, Heliopolis, Lhasa, or elsewhere, and given trials of great endurance involving both physical and spiritual tests. This reminds me of that beautiful book, The Opening of the Dragon Gate, which is a story that takes place in modern times, actually, back in the time of the Maoist revolution, and how some adepts of the Taoist tradition were looking for someone to continue the lineage. And they were aware that that one of the great masters had embodied was in a small child, and they had to find the child and then find a way to train the child up. And so this is the story about how all of that happened. It's a marvelous, marvelous book. Highly recommend it. So the rigors of these trials almost defy imagination, and many would-be chelas fell short of passing the mark. And remember that back then also you had to balance 100% of your karma to take your ascension. So those who did not, and those, the rigors of the tests defy imagination, many of the would-be chelas fell short of passing the mark. Those who did not fall short, those who passed the mark, are now among the immortals. Today, however, changing times, new methods of communication and transportation and other factors have altered many old conditions. The new spiritual techniques have been evolved just as material methods have changed. And therefore, most of the students living in the present Aquarian age are being given the initiations in the outer world. Karmic events are, so to speak, altered, whereby friends, relatives, associates, and even the man in the street become instruments through which their tests come. It's interesting the way the phrase is that karmic events are, so to speak, altered. So this is the influence of the masters, the influence of our great adepts, whereby friends and relatives and associates and even the man in the street becomes the instruments through which the tests come. This makes it necessary for mankind, and especially the would-be disciple, to be extremely vigilant, for no one never knows when a vital and conclusive test may be in the offing. Shananda continues and says, let me amplify that you must not permit this statement to cause you to become apprehensive. Just be diligent to behave as a Christ, remembering his words, inasmuch as ye have done it unto the least of these, my brethren, you have done it unto me. And if you will really follow this, you may well pass any test with flying colors that the brotherhood sends you for your perfection, admonishment, and initiation into the highest spiritual brotherhood, the great white brotherhood, the fraternity of beloved Jesus, Kuthumi, Almoria, Tualkul, beloved Lanto, Kuan Yin, Mother Mary, beloved Serapis Bey, Paul the Venetian, and every ascended and cosmic being. Now we've all are familiar with Moria and the Chela on the path. And he tells us that whether Christian or Jew, Muslim or Zen Buddhist or none of these, know, O seeker after a higher reality, that the path of initiation can be trod wherever you are, but you must take the first step. My responsibility is to guide and guard. Yours is to follow, but you must take the first step. And that first step it's interesting. Sometimes the test is to pause and secure attunement before moving. And I suppose that's always the case, that we want our attunement and before moving. But so in that case, the test is actually not to take the inclined action. But in other cases, the test is, are you going to move or are you not going to move? You don't want to be moved just by circumstances, but there are times when you must initiate the next step. With full faculties of mind and heart and soul, you chart the course of your life. If you desire, the grid of hierarchy and of initiation through the hierarchy can be superimposed upon your chart, upon your heart, upon the path. And if you have not the desire for initiation, if there is no longing to replace the old man with the new, if there's no desiring for freedom, then you cannot magnetize the molecules of our momentum on the path, nor will you magnetize the mind of the great initiator who proves not only the testing, but the wherewithal to pass the test. Now that's an interesting way to refer to the great initiator, which of course is also a nickname for our beloved Lord Maitreya, who provides not only the test, but the wherewithal to pass the tests. Moria reminds us of the crash program in chelas and initiation at Darjeeling for those willing to follow implicitly the demands of their own Christ self. But remember that phrase from said, immediate obedience to the inner teacher secures instantaneous mastery. I think this famous Sadhamanu. Here in Darjeeling, we offer a crash course for those willing to follow implicitly the demands of their own Christ self. and to respond with a flame that leaps and with the eyes that sparkle with the kindling fires of soul discernment. I love that phrase, that they're teaching a crash course in initiation for those who are willing to implicitly follow the demands, in other words, to obey their own Christ self. To be free to respond to the initiations of the path, you must be free from the magnetism of mankind's carnal mindedness. For to be carnally minded is death, but to be spiritually minded is life and peace. You must be free to accept the limitless reality of your being and not allow anyone to take from you the freedom to be unlimited in your God self. You know, if there's ever a sense of being kind of stuck, I'm always reminded of the beautiful dictation from Helios in 1990 July class. And he introduced us there to the Victory Symphony, Beethoven's symphony, also called the Wellington Symphony. And he just said, we gave Beethoven that music, and it's our fanfare. So play it. And play it again, play it daily, play it again and again until you're totally caught up in the victory and the smiling momentum of Helios and Vesta and the sun center of being. So it's one of those. I mean, music, of course, is a wonderful tool, but there's a couple of them that have great promise. A couple of the individual pieces that have great promise in them, and that's one of them, with the full sponsorship and presence of Helios and Vesta with that. And then I also think of how we were reminded by Sanu Kumara to meditate on Finlandia, the orchestral version, in the morning, and to invoke and receive the full gathered momentum of freedom, victory, and God determination. Sometimes the test is simply to accept the gift. On the path of initiation, Maitreya mentioned that you know me as a great initiator. You've also called me most lovingly to be initiated on the path of attainment. But when I come, you've not recognized me. In vain, I've stood before you to initiate you into the law of energy flow. And the first initiation on the path of attainment is to learn to deal with energy. And as much as energy is God, learning to deal with energy is learning to deal with God. God is spirit, God is matter, God is manifestation in man, in woman, in child, God within yourself, and the flow of energy from the centers of God awareness. God is the flow of energy between yourself and other selves, from heart to heart, from soul to soul, from mind to mind. In our book study this morning on Walking with the Master, we were discussing how there are times when you have to go within, and there are times when the actual initiation is to go out and work with other people. And we were reminded of how some of the desert fathers sought to go out into the desert where they wouldn't be bothered by all of the people in the city. And then they formed their communities. And then after that, some of them would want to go leave the community and go out and be a hermit further out in the desert. And they just wanted to go pursue their light. But after they got enough light, then the magnetism of the light itself would cause the city to come out into the desert to find them and receive their ministration and love and preaching and so forth. So that's one of the recurrent themes among the desert fathers. And it's, at one level, it's the Son of Man hath no place to lay his head, but it also shows that, if Muhammad can't come to the mountain can come to Muhammad, and that if we enter into the oneness of God, then the circumstances can move, and the mountains can move, and the populations can move. And we're being taught by the Brotherhood now in this dispensation, as Shananda was telling us, to go through all of these experiences that we used to have to go out in the desert for, and to learn them right where we are. The purpose of initiation is to inaugurate spirals of God integration within souls who would move toward the center of being that is life. Life in all of its dazzling splendor, life in its concentrated essence of this sacred fire. It's too intense for mortals who have subjected themselves unto the laws of mortality. So those who live by death and death's disintegration are not prepared to live in a life that is God. It is an absolute requirement of the law of life that you don the spirals of integration. Integration with God, with your own God self, day by day, line by line. The challenge of initiation is to integrate the soul, that potential of selfhood, with the spirit of the living God, the I am that I am. And the keys to initiation are the science of harmony, the science of energy flow, and the science of the spoken word. In the early parts of opening the seventh seal, we're reminded that the purpose of the path and success on the path is determined by communing, by connecting, communing, and uniquely working with the I am presence, the Christ self, and the spoken word to accomplish all that is needed in life. Now, there are people who gain much attainment in the world by the world. And our beloved Rose of Light told us in a dictation back in the 80s that people who marshaled their forces and skillfully navigated their way in the world, but did it without the attunement of the heart, even though they achieved great mastery in the world, they would have to give up all of that mastery and do it over again by the heart, by the threefold flame of the heart. Periods of grace spent in the Holy of Holies, deep within, are moments of God identification that mark the ascent of the aspiring one. These moments in the mountain of God are a promise and a preparation for the moments of eternity to come, when the soul by attainment will fly on the wings of initiation to the heights of a vaulted cathedral of the heart. And thus, by initiation, the lark ascends. We give you keys that you might discover the formula of your own initiation. The formula is locked in the heart of your I am presence and in the magnificent spheres of your causal body of light. Back in the 1930s, Saint Germain recommended in the I am activity that we just take 5 minutes 3 times a day and focus on still the self. And for 5 minutes, focus on the presence. And he said that will make all the difference. Now, we've had a few cases of specific initiations. We know sacrifice, selflessness, service, and surrender in the opening of the seventh seal. Very specific sequences of initiations, each developed with their own chapter and lots of development there. And then in the same book on 352, we have 33 initiations that illustrate the life of Jesus. So we have the 7 initiations in each of the 4 lower bodies, and then the 5 secret ray initiations. And then, of course, there's the famous test of the 10 with our beloved in that early book with Kuthumi on the human aura. Okay. Let's see, any questions or comments or observations or stories?
Thank you, Patrick. This is a great time for that. Is questions for anyone?
I had an incident in Austria and also in Germany, Köln, in the cathedral, where we went into the catacombs and I became totally dark. So I'm wondering whether my hard work is not working. It was totally bright, and I saw Christ really upset and on the cross, and it happened twice. So I'm not quite sure how I got there, but I'm wondering whether my heart work needs to be renewed or what.
Well, yeah, let's see, I'm not sure I'm quite getting it, but there were a couple of times you had experiences in church.
Yes.
And
in the catacombs.
In what?
In the catacombs.
Oh, in the catacombs. Okay, yeah,
in
yeah.
the catacombs, yes. And it was very scary. And I didn't understand quite what was going on. So
Well, so that just means that you had a partial experience and you know in the catacombs. So that's fine. I mean, most of us spent some time there if we were in that part of the world at all and involved in the, you know, the Christian side of of that period instead of in the Judaic or whatever. So,
yes,
and they were, yeah, I know several people actually who have had various kinds of experiences, either visiting the catacombs in a trip to Rome or having some similar experience triggered when they were in uh, a unique experience, like, you know, in the dark long at night
yes,
and so forth and so on.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So it brought up kind of a partial memory, and that's fine, you know. So and I don't know that means that there's more work to do or not. You can certainly make calls on the experience, and you can either ask for further illumination on the matter, or more importantly, perhaps you to have the records transmuted so that you can fearlessly move forward in your embracement of Christ and your following on the path with Christ to your own ascension.
Right. So how do I transmute that? I'm just new to all this. I'm sorry. If everybody else knows what to do, I don't.
Well, yeah, you know, anytime we have some like an internal understanding,
Yes,
anytime we have that, uh, all you do is you make a call to the master of your choice, you know,
yes,
beloved Saint Germain, beloved Jesus, beloved Mother Mary, whomever you like to
yes.
work with, and ask them to help you to understand what you need to understand, to transmute what you need to transmute, and uh, to take all of that experience and move forward then for the experiences that are yours to have in this life. And
Oh, thank you very much.
sure. So all of it, you'll find all of it is in a nice, it's like a train going up a mountain, you know. Each car is its own, but it's all part of a big story. So there'll be lots of lovely experiences, you know, and not all of them were pleasant at the time, but they'll all flow into a pattern of progress and and continual freedom for your own advancement on the path.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much for that. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great. Joanna, did you have a question?
Oh, you saw that. Hey there, Patrick. This is Joanna Parlier.
Well, how lovely to hear you.
Yeah. You could put this into a book. You could just write a book. It's how it's written.
Well,
that's just a suggestion.
I would say that that's a good example, Joanna, of paying attention because you never know when the master might speak. And and in this case, and in this case, I know that if I'm not motivated to get some things into the recording, that I will be deficient when I move on, because we're all going to move on sometime, and we might as well have our work done when we go. Yeah. So I
That's right.
appreciate the encouragement.
Oh, well, you're welcome. God bless you.
Thank you.
Enjoyed your presentation.
So many old friends that we run into again on this path, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Hopi has a thank you for sharing such insightful teachings in the chat. Are there any other comments or questions for Patrick as we wrap up this session?
Can I ask one more question, please? I was very curious about your hearing expertise. I'm doing tinnitus, and of course I've got a hearing aid, but I kind of feel I can improve, but I'm stuck. So any suggestions?
Can you work with let's see. Yeah, you need to kind of make some inquiries. If sometimes the person that you got the hearing aid from is actually capable of working with various degrees of therapy and exercises and so forth that can help you to listen better, hear better, and understand better. And
Okay.
because things are a little different when you have some assistance. It's like getting used to a pair of glasses, you know.
Yes.
Sometimes you get a headache for a week or two before they kind of lock in. And other times it has to, it wasn't quite right and it has to be changed. So I would recommend that first to see if the person either himself or herself is capable of giving you the assistance that you'd like. And if some of them are just sort of technicians with instruments, and that's all they do.
Okay.
But they could probably give a referral that would help you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And thank
You're
you
welcome.
for the lecture. It was wonderful. Thank you. Very enlightening, and helped me work out test and initiation. So thank you.
You're certainly welcome. All glory to God and Guru, eh?
Amen. Anyone else? We're going to wrap up in a couple of minutes. Irene Scully wrote in the chat, what is the best way to pass a test, or does each test have a specific action that must be taken?
The best way to pass a test is to obey your own Holy Christ self. And every initiation, every test is unique, although some of them, we get to repeat them until we get it right. But everyone's quite unique. And so, yeah, I would say the best way to pass the test is to pay attention.
Okay. And you said before that Jananda said, be diligent, behave as the Christ.
Yep.
Well,
Obey your Christ self. Immediate obedience to the inner teacher secures instantaneous mastery.
Oh, thank you for repeating that, because I didn't have that instantaneous mastery piece. Thank you very much, Patrick. This has been wonderful. Thanks everyone for coming. We're very excited to have you here, and we're all going to pass our test, and we're going to get together next month. And I'm not sure who our presenter is, but we've got several who are ready to go. So we're looking forward to March. And God bless you, Patrick. We are grateful for your wisdom and your sharing it with us, and we love you profoundly.
Thank you. Of course, as our dear Saint Germain says, may you pass every test.
Thanks, Patrick. I love your hat too, Patrick.
What's that?
I love